For a long time, there was a conference that dominated football. They were in pretty much every national championship for a decade and a half. They were the conference to beat and were as deep with talent as they were dominant. If you don't know who I'm talking about, it's clearly the Southeastern Conference, better known as the SEC, a land where it just meant more. The problem is that eras eventually end, but due to the nature of college football, it's not always clear to see when that era is truly over, but I think it's time that we finally have the SEC talk. Because while I think and I'm going to try to prove that they have ended their era of dominance, it really does feel like college football is still trying to figure it out. But to really understand the situation we're in, we obviously have to go back. But first, let's talk about something that is not overrated: your sleep. Being a dad of two has really showed me the importance of quality sleep, and I understand it because I'm not getting a lot of it. And nothing has helped my sleep more than the sponsor of today's video, Bear Mattress. Now, I've had my Bear mattress for a little over 6 months now, and it has really done wonders. I feel like I fall asleep faster, I stay cool in the middle of the night and don't get like sweaty and hot, and I wake up feeling completely rejuvenated, even when I don't get as much sleep as I probably should because the little ones are waking me up. And the best part about it is just how convenient it is to get your Bear mattress. I mean, they ship it right to your door, so all you have to do is crack open the box, unroll it, let it inflate, and you're good to go. And if you're worried about the mattress being the perfect fit for you, you don't need to worry. They've got 2 things to help with that. First, you can take the sleep quiz to make sure you get the mattress that's perfect for you. Like, I got the Elite Hybrid and it is awesome. But they even have an 120-night sleep trial to make sure that you love your mattress, which for me, out of the ballpark, absolutely loved it. So treat yourself to something nice, okay? Go to bearmattress.com/IsaacPunts and use code IsaacPunts to get 40% off. That's almost half off of a mattress. So treat yourself to something nice, like I said, bearmattress.com, use code IsaacPunts. You're gonna thank me later. So to understand why the SEC is still warping college football through inflated ratings, we have to go to 2008, when second-year head coach Nick Saban was about to start the greatest coaching run of all time. For the next decade and a half, that Alabama team was going to do 2 very important things for the SEC, which was A, become the gold standard for college football based out of their very own conference by providing such consistently dominant teams that no one could be able to compete with them outside of what feels like a few flukish runs by Clemson, and B, arguably the more important point, they would be like a filter for the SEC, meaning that if any team was going to come out of the SEC that weren't Alabama, they were pretty much guaranteed to win it all because they would have to be better than arguably the best team in college football in any given year. And while you might think that it's glazing, it's really not. The SEC was in the national championship game 16 of the 17 games from 2008 to 2022. Heck, if we go back and include a couple years leading into Saban's takeover of Alabama, we get to see the Florida Gators win it in 06 and LSU win it in 07. So that's 19 straight years of an SEC team competing for the title, with their 1 year off being in 2015 when Oregon was playing Ohio State, and even then Ohio State had to beat Alabama in the first ever college football playoff to get there, and even that was a single score game before Ohio State would go on to blow the wheels off of Oregon, as everybody sort of felt like the true national championship game was the weekend prior. And like I alluded to, if Alabama wasn't the one competing for the championship, often whoever else went was. And those teams included some of the greatest college football teams of all time, like 2019 LSU and the 2022 Georgia team, while Alabama themselves also fielded some pretty nutty teams like their 2020 team in the year of total domination. But it wasn't just Alabama who was dominating during this time. The whole SEC was truly a breeding ground for high-quality teams. I mean, if you just look through, average SEC teams would dominate the ranked teams from other conferences. Like 2008, LSU crushed number 14 ranked Georgia Tech, or in 2010 when a 3-loss Alabama was forced to play against a 2-loss Michigan State team, and they would just beat the ever-loving dog water out of their bodies. Or heck, in 2015, the SEC went 9-2 in their postseason play, which, in case anybody was wondering why I'm using mostly postseason play, it's because it's the best way to see out-of-conference matchups. But they didn't just go 9-2, they were dominating their opponents. LSU demolished Texas Tech 56-27. A 7-6 Auburn team crushed Memphis by 21 points. Mississippi State absolutely stomped NC State 51-21. Alabama beat a one-loss Michigan State team 38-0. Ole Miss and Oklahoma State both entered at 10-3, but Ole Miss walked out with a 28-point victory. A 9-4 Tennessee destroyed Northwestern in one of their better years by 39 points, while Arkansas crushed Kansas State. And even their two losses was one where Texas A&M lost by just 6, and then, Florida got destroyed by Michigan. But even in the years where that wasn't the case, them having someone either competing for or winning the national title was enough bragging rights to make it a pretty moot point. And of course, you had the years where you couldn't tell them anything, like in 2017 when the playoff committee reluctantly put both Alabama and Georgia in the 3 and 4 seeds, and everybody outside of the SEC was hating on it and thought it was just bias. But then those teams didn't just win their respective semifinal games, but Alabama crushed Clemson 24-6, and Georgia took one of the best Oklahoma teams in a long time to a 2 overtime victory, as the world had to watch the rematch of the SEC championship, as SEC homers took that concept that their championship was pretty much the national championship. But in the middle of the 2010s, the SEC seemed pretty much untouchable. Other teams could have their moments in the sun, but at the end of the day, college football ran through that conference. But all of that sort of changed overnight. Let's take a look at the dusk of the SEC's dominance. We're in 2022, and the previous year's national champion, Georgia, set the tone for the year by crushing the Pac-12's bell cow in Oregon in a 49-3 slaughtering. And while the rest of the year would play out how the SEC is used to, with Georgia winning the SEC championship and thus go on to win the national championship in the most lopsided national championship game of all time, what was happening behind the scenes is you would see the inklings of decline. The average SEC teams weren't just losing, but they were getting blown out by mid-teams from other conferences. Like Missouri lost by double digits to Wake Forest, Iowa shut out Kentucky, and Texas Tech demolished Ole Miss. But of course, we can't talk bad about the SEC. They have now won 5 national championships in a row and allegedly are still the deepest and best conference, and teams like Ohio State, who, mind you, was only a missed game winner from being the ones to be able to blow out TCU, simply would not survive in the conference. Which brings us to 2023, the year the bottom fell out. This year, the two top dogs of the SEC would once again be Alabama and Georgia, where Alabama would win the championship, and many SEC fans expected both teams to make it with the dominance of their conference. But instead, the committee chose Texas, Michigan, Alabama, and Washington to go, foreshadowing the two conferences that would dominate football from here on out, as the following year Washington would join the Big Ten and Texas would join the SEC. But the thing is that this year, both SEC adjacent teams would get kicked out of the semifinals. And while there was a ton of uproar about how Georgia should have been let in, especially with their dominant win over Florida State in their bowl game, people still stood in shock as no SEC team was in the championship. But luckily, Georgia missing the playoffs was about to get changed, as many SEC teams were about to be in the next year as they introduced the 12-team structure. But the problem is that with Saban gone, the SEC would immediately begin to crumble. NIL was dispersing talent, there wasn't a clear best team in the SEC for recruits to flock to, and as every coach was trying to fill the void left by Saban, it ended up creating a level of parity that we had never seen. And boy did we feel it. By the end of the season, no one was undefeated. Texas had a chance to claim the crown, but lost to Georgia in their conference championship. Georgia, however, not only lost to Alabama that year, which was all but a tradition at this point, but also got blown out by Ole Miss. And Alabama, instead of being a dominant 1 or 2 loss team, got upset by Vanderbilt, edged out by Tennessee, but absolutely throttled by Oklahoma. And that Ole Miss team, who was Georgia's other loss, also let 3 games slip away from them. One to LSU, who was a good team, but the other 2 were to Kentucky and Florida, who were not good teams. And while I could go on all day with how pervasive this was in that conference, the big overarching narrative was not that it had gotten worse. It was talking about just how good and how deep the conference is. Yeah, we had 3 losses, but if Ohio State, Indiana, or Michigan were playing in this conference, they'd they'd be 6-loss teams, and we'd put up 100 points against any of the Big Ten bottom dwellers like Northwestern or Minnesota. And honestly, they should have 6 SEC teams in the first ever 12-team playoff. And man, if you could have seen them gloating as Notre Dame stomped Indiana or SMU got crushed by Penn State and Clemson fell to Texas, you would have been sick. But when Tennessee played Ohio State, suddenly nobody was laughing, as that arguably the most lopsided game of the first round, and one that was supposed to have been the highest parity as it was the 9 seed taking on the 8 seed, belonged to the SEC. But then the second round came. Texas, who was supposed to stomp a greatly inferior Arizona State team from the fraudulent Big 12 conference, had to take them to 2 overtimes to avoid the upset in Georgia. The team people expected to go all the way got absolutely embarrassed by Notre Dame, just for the Buckeyes a round later to smack the last SEC team right out of the competition. That's right, the alleged strongest conference had the worst loss in the first round, the least impressive win of the first round that was full of mostly blowouts, and could only sneak a team into the semifinals before Ohio State flicked them away like a footnote. And it wasn't like things were getting better outside the playoffs. Sure, Florida beat Tulane pretty handily in the SEC's first non-playoff bowl game, and Ole Miss handled business against Duke at the tail end. But those were the 2 pieces of bread at either end of a sandwich. Navy knocked off the Oklahoma Sooners. Alabama fell to Michigan, South Carolina to Illinois. All of these teams that would hypothetically go 3-8 if they had to play in the SEC were suddenly beating SEC teams that they wanted in the playoffs, and we suddenly realized maybe the SEC wasn't incredibly deep all the way through. Maybe their best teams just weren't that good anymore. And then we get to this year and seemingly nothing has changed. I mean, in the current AP Top 25, you have 8 SEC teams, which is more than any other conference. This includes 2 two-loss teams in Alabama and Oklahoma, above a 1-loss Power 4 team in BYU, where mind you, BYU's only loss is to number 5 Texas Tech. Both the AFCA and AP poll have elected to have their only 4-loss team in their list be from the SEC, with the AP choosing to have Missouri at number 25 and the AFCA choosing to have Tennessee. Mind you, this is leaving off teams like Iowa, who would have been dominant in their wins and only lost to top 25 teams and played some of the best teams in the country like Indiana, Oregon, and USC as hard as any other teams have played them. Heck, Iowa played Indiana better than Oregon played Indiana. But they just give the nod to random SEC teams who, let me check, were getting blown out by their top 25 opponents like Vanderbilt. Then you have little things like Kentucky, who played Texas and Ole Miss close, beat Florida and Auburn, but when playing against the ACC powerhouse of Louisville, got completely shut out and knocked back into next week in their most lopsided loss of the entire year. But nothing was more apparent that we still hadn't really realized how different the times are than when this week they announced where College Game Day was going to be, and they had 2 choices between the game featuring the number 1 and number 2 team in the country, with both teams' quarterbacks being the top 2 Heisman picks and one of the teams winning the seasons of all time, with the other team being the previous year's national championship winner with huge playoff implications. And the other game they could have chosen was the number 4 team playing the number 10 team for the second time this year. And it sounds like it's obvious which one they should have gone to, but alas, they choose that one because it's the SEC championship. And it's just plain that we do not understand where the SEC actually stands at this current time. They're not the insurmountable force they used to be. Their conference championship isn't guaranteed to be a national championship contender. Heck, they're not even guaranteed to look good in the postseason. But for some reason, we still treat that conference that way, with inflated top 25 rankings, a national attention where it's not due, and if Texas makes it in, playoff spots that wouldn't be given to anybody else with that record. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is the SEC really an inflated conference, or do you think that they're sneakily still good but just haven't performed in postseason play? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and peace.